Good morning, I'm Tamara Shoemaker. Every year in the kindergarten classroom where I worked, we had a whole fall unit on apples. And we would study the different kinds of apples, Fuji and Gala and Red Delicious and Golden Delicious and all sorts of other apples. And we found out how they grew. And we studied all parts of an apple, and we taste tested apples, and then we would culminate on non-COVID years with a field trip to a local apple orchard, which was always super fun. This morning, as I was reading in Romans chapter 10, I thought of apples and I thought of feet. And I don't know how those two things mishmashed together, but they did. So I'll get to the feet in a second. We'll start with the apples. Romans chapter 10, verses 8 to 10 says, "But what does it say? The word is near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we are proclaiming. That is, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you confess and are saved." So here's where the apple part comes in. In the center of the fruit, right, in the very heart of it, are the seeds. Surrounding the seeds is the core, the apple core, the hard protective portion of the apple that keeps the seed securely settled in the middle. And then from there outward, you have the tasty fruit, right? The tasty portion of the apple. And that's the part that people eat. Most people. I know some people who eat the core, but anyway. And then, of course, the skin wraps around the whole thing, keeping what's inside. And on the outside, it shows the brand or the color or the type of apple that you can kind of tell what kind it is just by looking at it. But the heart of the apple has to be good for the outside of the apple to be good. Right? If there's a rotten heart, the rest of the apple is going to be rotten too. Sometimes you have spots or bruises on an apple. Those come from outer testing, and generally, if you catch it early enough, you can cut it out and salvage the apple, right? But the core, if it's rotten, then the whole thing is rotten. So note both and. Paul sets up a both and argument, and he puts it in his letter to the Romans. He says, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and two conditions, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. In other words, if you confess with your mouth outwardly, the shiny outward part of the skin of the apple, but you don't believe in your heart is still black with sin, still unredeemed, still unforgiven, and so the whole fruit is rotted from the inside out. Both of those things have to be true to be saved. Conversely, if you believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead, truly believe, the exterior is going to be reflective of what is in your heart. So maybe you don't start up a blog and post daily entries about faith and devotion like, that was one of the things that I did. That's one type of apple. But maybe, for example, you serve in your church as a janitor. Maybe you teach Sunday school to children, and that's your passion. Maybe you work in an office that's hostile to faith, and by your quiet and peaceful presence or your work ethic, you eventually get noticed by your coworkers because of what's inside of you. You're different. Your core is sound. Your seeds are good, right? Sound core, good seeds. Now let's move on to beautiful feet. So what follows is actually a post that I had written back in March of this year, March 31st, 2021. And it was so exactly what I wanted to say this morning that I figured, most of you have probably forgotten what I said the first time around, so I'll just go ahead and post it again. Or if you didn't forget, that's great first, and also that's okay because then you can pass it on to somebody else who may not have read it yet or heard it yet. So first, the background. Paul's been weighing the difference between those who are under the law and those who are under grace. So he's been throughout the first part of Romans, he's been setting up like T-charts, right? And giving Jewish background and Gentile background and checking and balancing the perspectives of both. And here, Paul commissions gospel preachers with a weighty responsibility to share the good news to all, Jews and Gentiles, but with the understanding that Jews may claim that they haven't had a fair opportunity to respond to a gospel that hasn't yet been preached to them because they have been under law. Paul debunks that argument in Romans chapter 10, verse 18. But anyway, Paul says, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Romans 10:14-16. So in my Bible, I've bracketed that set of verses and in smudged purple ink. My statement from many years ago is still clearly visible in the margin. Mission in life, I said, are my feet beautiful? Are your feet beautiful? It's an honest question, like those apple skins, right? While they may not be pretty on the outside, what's inside of us is going to come out. If our heart is sound, we will have beautiful feet, we'll have pretty skin, we'll have sweet fruit. So let's avoid toe fungus at all costs, right? So here's my foot story. For the first 17 years of my life, I carried an extremely embarrassing and uncomfortable, sometimes very painful condition on the soles of my feet. A little thing most people call fungus. Yuck. And yes, it was gross. It cracked my feet, it peeled my skin from their bottoms and between my toes, and generally it made them look really disgusting. So I remember painting toenails once with a friend once. And we were in my bedroom and we were, being all artsy and pretty about it. And she glanced over at my feet and she kind of grimaced and she was like, "You have the ugliest feet I've ever seen." Thanks. I didn't flinch really. I'd already accepted those words as truth at that time in my life. I had ugly, gross feet. I would rub Tinactin and other antifungal creams on them to treat them when they were at their worst, but nothing ever really helped. And as I grew into the pure sensitive portion of my life, I hid my feet in sneakers or closed-toed sandals to hide the worst of the condition. Sometimes the condition would worsen a little bit. The cracks would bleed, or sometimes I couldn't walk without pain. Sometimes the skin peeled off in sheets. Most times the condition was topical only. It looked awful, but it didn't usually affect what I did. But it wasn't until I was 17 that our family had the ability to pay for a dermatologist. I had other skin conditions that needed more urgent attention than my feet. And so because insurance finally came through for such a doctor, we were able to go. And as the doctor checked me over, he came to my feet and he viewed my cracks and my peeling skin. He said, "Have you ever had your feet treated?" My mom and I glanced at each other. We were like, "No." And the doctor pulled out this metal scrapey thing. I don't know what you call it. I've obviously never been to medical school. And he scraped loose some pieces of skin. And he excused himself. He left the room. When he came back, he gave us the mind-blowing news. What I had accepted as unalterable, unchanging pain and embarrassment, probably for the rest of my life, could be easily cured, as though it had never existed. And I still remember the echo of the doctor's words, today. How would you like to get rid of that stuff on your feet? So long story shortish, I took some powerful antifungal pills for 14 days, and my feet looked like normal feet. No cracks, no peeling, no sore spots, no longer an embarrassment, smooth, supple, undamaged skin. So 17 years one way, in a ridiculously short amount of time, a complete reversal, the flawless beauty of transformation. I thought about this as I went back to my reading the other day, Matthew 26:6-13, and then Mark 14:3-9, Luke 7:36-50, and John 12:1-8. All four of those passages describe a dinner that Jesus is eating where a woman appears and she has an interesting interaction with Jesus's feet. It's not exactly clear the circumstances. John writes this as an encounter with Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, and it takes place in their home. Matthew and Mark both write that it's a dinner at the home of Simon the leper, though the woman may have been Mary. Luke describes this as being a dinner in the home of a Pharisee named Simon, possibly the leper, although it's not clear why a Pharisee would be associated with this title. And the woman is a prostitute, or a woman who has lived a sinful life in that town. So it could be that these are two separate occasions spaced at various parts of Jesus's ministry. Luke's account takes place early on in his gospel, while Matthew, Mark, and John place theirs near or in Holy Week. And maybe Mary has heard of the previous woman's encounter with Jesus and decides to do a similar act of devotion. Or it could be that Mary, who is Martha and Lazarus' sister, is the one who has lived a sinful life in that town. Lots of possibilities. I'm going to look forward to hearing this account again, told in clarity when I get to heaven. But whatever the case, I want to look at Jesus's feet and at a woman who honors them. So in Luke's account, the one that takes place in the home of a Pharisee named Simon, who may or may not have been trying to trap Jesus with wordplay, Luke writes, When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, she kissed them, and she poured perfume on them. That's Luke 7:37-38. I've always felt uncomfortable when I've read this. Jesus may never have had a fungal condition, right, shredding his soles like I did, but whatever the case, feet are gross. There's just no getting around it. They are the parts of the body usually responsible for transporting a person from point A to point B, and they get bathed in the ignominy of dirt and dust and germs, every imaginable and unimaginable ick factor during their journey. This was even more the case when people constantly wore sandals or went barefoot, as they typically did in the geographical portion of the world and the time period in which Jesus lived and traveled, right? So customarily, the host of a household during this time would invite his guests inside and would give them water to wash their feet as a courtesy. However, Simon the Pharisee did not display this courtesy, which is why it's imaginable that he was trying to trap Jesus here rather than simply fellowship with him. Jesus turns to his host and he says, "Did you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not pour oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet." And that's Luke 7:44-46. In other words, all the things about this host, or all the things this host should have shown as simple courtesies to his guests, they're ignored. In contrast, a woman, a prostitute, someone from the dregs of society, takes up the position ignored by the Pharisee, the whitewashed tomb, as Jesus calls them in Matthew chapter 23. She washes Jesus' feet with her tears. No fluffy towel, no problem. Hair will do. She kisses his feet when his host ignores the courteous greeting of a kiss on the cheek. She anoints his feet with oil when his host should have blessed the guests with oil on their foreheads. So Jesus exonerates the woman before the guests, and he says, "Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much, but he who has been forgiven little loves little." So in all honesty, what God told me through this was simple. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news. This is also in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 7, but as I read, Romans 10:15. So in other words, Jesus is the bringer of the best news, the gospel. And no matter what the soiled, dusty, dirty condition of his physical appendages in Simon's house, to the woman who most needed Jesus' message of good news, his feet are priceless. They're beautiful. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 15, a new descriptor is added to Jesus' feet. His feet were like bronze, glowing in a furnace. Feet that have been through the worst and now offer the best. This woman who lives on the bottom crust of society kisses the least of his body, his feet. This woman who is the brunt of the town's gossip becomes the talk of the feast. This woman, who has never been presented before the synagogue or anointed by the priest as forgiven, is forgiven by the Most High Priest, who will carry her sins to the cross. What was once this woman's unalterable, unchanging pain, embarrassment, and unforgiveness, Jesus turns around and makes clean and clear and pure. He forgives her sins. She is at once whole again, as though she had never sinned. So this morning, do a quick foot check. What is the condition of your feet? Are they beautiful? Are they as beautiful as he means them to be? Hope you enjoyed that. Hope it encourages you. Hope you're blessed through the rest of your day. I will see you tomorrow for Romans chapter 11.